وتحفز النفس الكريمة تبتغي الجنات بحلول شهر الصوم والرحمات والرضوان.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the third juz of the Quran, two very important themes are discussed, and a third one, which inshallah we will allude to as well. But the two primary themes that are discussed in the third juz of the Quran is, one is the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are impressed in this juz, and thereafter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Isa alayhi salatu wasalam and the relationship that Isa alayhi salatu wasalam has with the believers, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly describes the initiation and creation of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, and the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will now give him death later on. And Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will be protected from any harm that was intended to him in this worldly life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also in this juz discusses the Ayatul Kursi, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so reveals Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. This is not just a surah or an ayat rather of virtue, but the ayat and its recitation itself is a source of the strengthening of the iman of a person, and it describes the great attributes and qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by his description of Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum, the one who is ever living and the one who is ever on guard and watchful. La ta'khuduhu sinatu wa la nawm. Nor slumber nor sleep overcomes him. Now the purpose of the revelation and the sabab, or the means of why this revelation had now come down to the ummah, was to educate all and sundry, especially the mushrikeen, those that attributed human qualities to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free of any human attributes. It was the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that not only stone and wood would be worshipped in the form of idols, but kings, princes, sometimes even priests had now reached a status of divine elevation. And it was common amongst them that they would try and hide their human attributes away from people. Fir'aun was an example. Although he lived many centuries before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was a prime example by way of the fact that he would claim divinity, but he would make an attempt to hide his human attributes away from the people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this description of himself, Al-Hayyul Qayyum, La ta'khuduhu sinatu wa la nawm, refutes that belief and that characteristic. That how is it possible that if you claim any human being to be your God, your divine leader, then it's only inevitable that sleep and slumber will overtake him? As was observed by many leaders at that time, that when a public display would be on, when they would parade through the streets, quite often they would fall asleep. They would attempt to hide their human attributes, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to a fact that although the human being may be able to hide their personal needs of eating and drinking for a while, where it comes to involuntarily dozing off, sinatu wala nawm, the word sinna in particular, nobody can really help it that you will be overcome with sleep even if your intention was not to sleep at that point in time. Hence, this description was to harp upon the idea and to appeal to the minds of people that human beings who claim divinity in any possible way are incorrect. And it is only the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be Al-Hayy, Al-Qayyum, who He will never be overcome by sleep nor by slumber. Thereafter, the discussion of Surah Baqarah itself in the third juz goes towards the recreation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. one of the objections that the kuffar had raised against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that how is it possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give life to bones that are dead? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was instructed to give them a number of examples, and one of those examples which appears in the Quran Kareem is related to Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. That Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, on one occasion when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, kayfa tuhyi al-mawta, and Allah subhanahu, how do you give life to the dead? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first of all questions Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam that do you not believe? Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam affirms that he believes, وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي, but so that my heart can receive some tranquility on the topic of how you bring life to death, death to life. Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to now slaughter 4 birds and to mix up the contents of their of their entrails and their meat, etc., and then to put them on 4 hillocks far away from him, and then to call out to them, and they will come to you running. And in this way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him practically that how life will now, or death will now come to life and spring forth once again. Thereafter the discussion once again goes into the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this time by way of ma'mulat and by way of interaction. It is in this juz towards the end of Surah Baqarah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala displays and shows unto the ummah the prohibition of riba and interest. الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا, that those people who eat interest will not stand إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ, except like how a person that has been struck with an effect from shaitan. In those days, whenever a person would display behavior that was regarded as abnormal, wherein they would now show strange behavior, the common description used to describe their behavior was that this person here was struck down by Iblis, or struck down by shaitan, or a shaitan in some way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this as a punishment that may be literal. Some ulama say that it may be figurative because of the fear that that person will experience in the hereafter. But nonetheless, the prohibition of riba has been established in this juz at the end of Surah Baqarah, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the same time commends permissible transaction. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made transaction permissible and has made riba impermissible. And although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alludes to riba in other places in the Quran Kareem itself, this is a clear-cut instruction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the prohibition of riba and the worldly and akhirah effects of what riba does. Yamhaqullahu riba, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will now decrease and wipe out interest, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause sadaqat and charity to now increase and to now prosper. It is widely historically accepted that whilst riba and interest was alluded to as an undesirable practice throughout Islam, even in Madinatul Munawwara as well, the official prohibition towards the ummah came at the time of Hajjatul Wada, the final pilgrimage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wherein the prohibition of riba was now established. Also, towards the end of Surah Baqarah, still in the 3rd juz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about another very important aspect of transacting. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, that O you who believe, إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ إِلَى أَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى, that when you now transact towards any sort of transaction, be it a debt or otherwise, to a fixed time, فَاكْتُبُوا, so then write it down. This is an important instruction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the ummah that avoid grief in this world and in the hereafter by writing down your transactions, and also possibly getting it witnessed as well, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to that witnessing factor. It is not considered as obligatory that a person writes down every single transaction that they do. But what the scholars advise is that those major to middle transactions, big purchases, promises that a person made, not run-of-the-mill purchases of bread and milk, but rather larger transactions, especially transactions that one has this concern and fear that may lead to issues later on by way of rights being oppressed, especially if I'm not around. It now becomes necessary that a person writes it down and has it witnessed as is discussed at the end or towards the end of Surah Baqarah. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala includes the ayat in Surah Baqarah, Amana ar-Rasul bima unzila ilayhi min Rabbi wal mu'minun. These two ayats here are regarded as the two or one of the two most virtuous ayats of the Quran Kareem, wherein a person should often recite, and according to many narrations and riwayat, revealed at the time of the Isra and the Mi'raj upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or revealed twice, one in this world and one at the time of Mi'raj as well. Thereafter, the third juz goes into Surah Imraan, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, amongst the many discussions of Surah Imraan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, a very important discussion regarding his conception, wherein Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam now conceives Isa alayhi salam, but prior to Maryam alayhi salam, the noble family of Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam, the Imraan, the family of Imraan, is now discussed. That what was the intention, the niyat of the mother of Maryam alayhi salam, that although she knew very well that her child will be born as an orphan, she already intended that my child be free for the khidmah and for the service of Masjidul Aqsa. And she laments when the child is born as a girl, for normally girls are not used for this particular service of a masjid. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala nonetheless accepts her, and she grows up under the care and the custody of her uncle, Zakaria alayhi salatu wasalam. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of her conceiving Isa alayhi salatu wasalam and the Mubarak birth of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, and to conclude in the last quarter of the juz itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses the important aspect of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam not being crucified. إِذْ قَالَ اللَّهُ يَا عِيسَى إِنِّي مُتَوَفِّيكَ, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "O Isa, I will give you death," in reference to the future, in reference to him now coming back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also describes that how they intended to now cause fitna with Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so saved Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. وَرَافِعُكَ, then I will raise you to me and I will purify you from those who disbelieved. Those who disbelieved, according to many scholars, and the purification that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to are those who, number one, claimed Isa alayhi salatu wasalam not to be a prophet of Allah, and those who claimed divinity in Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, who are also disbelievers and who are also kuffar. These are amongst the many important themes that have been discussed in the third juz of the Quran Kareem. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us aql salim, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding. Ameen.
واكتب لنا أن ندخل الجنات بالريان.